Our next speaker is Jeffrey Dorko. Jeff is Assistant Administrator for Logistics Office of Response and Recovery for FEMA. Jeff has a public service career that spans more than 35 years at the federal level, mostly with the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, his capstone assignment with the U.S. Army was as Deputy Commanding General of Military and International Operations, where he led a combined team of civilian and military personnel. That was an 11,000-person combined team and managed $28 billion worth of program. So we're lucky today. We're lucky to have Jeff here because he's here to open a dialogue with EGSA. This is a unique opportunity for us, and it's at a unique time. FEMA is working through their 2018 through 2020 strategic plan, and that plan places special emphasis on integrating federal capabilities with those of the private sector. We are the private sector. So the Logistics Directorate is working to find new ways to enable the timely and effective restoration of private sector commercial services and businesses affected by disasters such as hurricanes Harvey, Sandy, Irma. And as our audience will agree, power restoration may well be the most critical first step in getting disaster survivors in impacted areas on the road to normalcy, especially after a terrible experience. So we consider this an extremely important opportunity for EGSA and FEMA to improve our collective service to disaster relief efforts and survivors in their greatest hour of need. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for Assistant Administrator Jeff Dorko.
Wow, thanks a lot. What are your questions? I went to a course once, and a bunch of senior people in the room, and a very senior person in government came in, and you sit around, there are I think 10 of us, and you figure you're going to have the opportunity to kind of hear, get a little speech, you're going to sit around, listen for a while, then, what are your questions? He walks in, he sits down, he goes, what are your questions? And we sat there, ooh, man, who's going to ask the first question? There was this Navy admiral, he always up there, and he asked a question, and this really senior official looked at him and he said, how did you make flag rank asking questions like that? And so he answered the question, and he came back and what's the second question? It took a while for the second question to be pried out of people. Hey, thanks for having me here. I mean, my work is done, I think, just by being able to stand up on this stage. I think there was some management guru, at the end of the 20th century, late 1999 or whatever, somebody wrote one of those management books, and it talked about, the key to success in the 21st century for organizations is going to be relationships and speed of delivery. And I absolutely believe that, and I think this relationship we've struck up, again, I could walk off the stage now, and I think we're successful with what we've done last night in conversing, what we're doing today, and what we're going to get at here. And I appreciate the introduction. I mean, you framed exactly where I want to go with stuff, and believe me, I'll keep us on time, because you had a bunch of young people up here, really motivational, high, talented folks come up, and you had an entrepreneur, actor, comedian come up here, and now you got a federal government guy who's got some PowerPoint slides. And I'm going to try to live up to your expectations. I only got a half a dozen of them, and the last one, you got to hang around the last one, because that's I do business with FEMA, and I know you're interested in that. We'll get to that, but again, I want to have a conversation. I have a guy, Charles Middleton. Charles, where are you at? You out there? Charles. Okay, Charles Goodwin, over in the corner. He's going to answer all the hard questions. When you say, let's talk wet stacking or something like that, I'm going to point at him. So the two of us, I think, I want to engage again in a conversation with you all. But first, I got these slides because I want to create some context and let you know from whence we come. I know a number of you out there had conversations. You're saying, hey, we're helping the 249th Engineer Battalion rebuild generators. Or you may have some role in disaster response, in temporary power or power restoration, and some of you may not. So I want to do some level setting here and talk a little bit about where the strategic plan has taken us. And I want to talk about this private sector integration, because that's what this is all about. new FEMA administrator came in and gave us a new mission statement. I thought it was kind of unique how he did it. It was almost a contest across FEMA. Hey, let everybody suggest. We had the previous mission statement was great, but let's come up with a very simple and focused way to talk about what our mission is in life and what we do for the American people. And you can see it here, just to help people before, during, and after disasters. I can think of no more sacred mission to have than this one, because we're talking about people who just had potentially the worst day of their lives, and we all collectively, we in FEMA, you all here, and a lot of other folks in a lot of other sectors, the military show up to try to get their feet on the ground back towards some normal. And it may be a new normal that doesn't look like the previous normal. We want it to be as close to what they had before as it can be, but we want to go down that road. I think last night, a couple of people have asked me, you were in the Army for 34 years. So why FEMA? And Craig Fugate asked that same story when he interviewed me like 6 years ago when I came on in FEMA. It's a little bit of a sappy story, but you go back to Katrina and Rita. I was commander of Southwestern Division for the Corps of Engineers in Dallas, and I was down in the Beaumont area and was out wandering around one morning and came upon a small house, just a little wood frame thing, and we were putting some blue roof sheeting on. And there was a local contractor doing it. We wanted to do that. And another local contractor was helping us provide quality assurance. I had some of our young emerging leaders there helping pull all this together. The lady who lived in the house was like 88 years old. And she had a really, really strong German accent. She had immigrated here, and she was handing out cookies. And I think the cookies and crackers she had on her plate were the last stable thing she had in her house. And she took me inside and was crying and showed me a Bosendorfer piano she had over in the corner. And given her broken English and my broken German, I think I got the story right. I mean, she had it covered in newspapers, pieces of plastic, plates, pots and pans, because the roof was leaking over the top of the piano. And this was a cherished heirloom that had been in their generation or their family for generations, and that she had brought over from Germany, or her family had. And there was a storm coming, and she was so relieved to know that she was going to have a roof that was going to keep water off that until she could get more permanent repairs done. And so I told Craig Fugate, I go, that's why I'm here. Is this like a lot like being in the Army and serving America? Yeah, but you don't need to be in the Army to continue to serve Americans like you do in this power business. I mean, that's why I'm in this, and that's why I tell all my folks in at least our organizational logistics, hey, on any given day, take 2 steps back and look at what you're doing. If you're not doing something that's focused on helping a disaster survivor now, or getting ready to help a disaster survivor tomorrow, or whenever the next event might happen that we have to respond to, then you're probably working on the wrong thing. Go to your supervisor. We'll figure out how to stop you from doing what you're doing and get focused on the right thing. That's what this is all about. And I think we've reached an inflection point, particularly in the logistics business, to where we can leverage the power of the private sector in ways that we haven't in the past. FEMA, you see the map here, we're scattered around the globe. I guess the point here that I want to make on this is a couple things. One, we're everywhere, but we're very thin. We have 10 regions. We in the logistics business, we have distribution centers in Guam and Puerto Rico and everywhere, not everywhere in between, but a number of places in between. So a lot of responsibilities. You can imagine the last couple of weeks when we had Super Typhoon Mangkhut rolling over Guam, Saipan, Tinian, and Rota. At the same time, we had the Olivia that was hitting or attempting to make a hit at Hawaii before it kind of dissipated. And then we had Florence coming in from the Atlantic, and we had Isaac going south of Puerto Rico. Unprecedented, a potential 4 strikes that kind of stretch us. But FEMA is everywhere, and FEMA is largely a grants organization. If you look at the federal government, what do you look at when you look at a federal agency? You look at their authorities, sources. Where's the money, and what does the money go to? And we're a grants organization. And if you think about it, the biggest dollar value of everything we do is the National Flood Insurance Program. Boy, I'm not really good on that. Please don't ask any flood insurance questions. And then we do all sorts of grants for individual assistance, individuals and households, to get individuals and households back on their feet. And then public infrastructure, repairing the roads that are damaged and the culverts that are blown out and the bridges and the water and the wastewater systems that are out there. So those are all the big bucks. And if you track it to the big bucks, you would believe we're just a grants organization and manage that. And that is a huge part of what we do sometimes for months and years after disasters go on. But more to the point is what these regions do and what the headquarters bring to bear in the immediate response. That's absolutely critical. When Brock Long came on, he looked at the back of the room. He goes, "Where's the logistics guy?" I raised my hand, and he goes, "You're the most important guy in the room." He goes, "One, because you'll probably get me fired before anything else here, because if FEMA can't step up and do that immediate life-saving and life-sustaining response mission that it has to do, what does all this grant stuff matter afterwards?" And again, I mean, when it comes to disasters, there are probably a significant number of folks in this audience who are disaster survivors. And when you get the power turned back on and there's fuel to go in people's gas tanks, about 90% of your problems are solved. When the kidney dialysis center can operate and lights are on at home and the refrigerator's running and you can get gas in your car because you know you can drive down to the Piggly Wiggly or the Safeway, the Albertsons or whatever, and get groceries, you're 90% of the way back. The rest of the stuff in the big grants programs will come over time. And so this is the architecture of what we do, and you all play in this. I mean, if you look at, we begin by preventing. We do preventative things out there to make sure that the impacts of disasters aren't going to be felt. And then there's a preparedness part of all this. And I'll tell you what, if you listen to the administrator these days, it's all about individual preparedness. We as individuals need to be prepared. I know I'm not as prepared at home as I should be to be able to live for an extended period of time when a big disaster comes. And we'll talk about what the truly catastrophic is in a minute. We tend to focus on response and recovery. Response, that immediate temporary power mission that could range from small spot generation to microgrids to getting the whole grid restored, all that's really important. And then it rolls into recovery. And in a minute, I want to talk to you a little bit about at least how my vision of how we react to disasters has changed based on what we saw in 17 from Harvey in Texas, Irma's impact at St. Thomas, St. John's, and then into Florida and up the East Coast, and then finally with Maria. And then finally mitigation. Every disaster that happens, a state will petition the president as part of its disaster declaration to have mitigation money. And a lot of times that ends up being up to 15% of everything else that is spent to go and mitigate against future problems. And I think power and hardening ourselves against what might come our way in terms of disasters in power, I think is an important part of this, an important part of where that money goes. Disaster continuum. Just look at this picture because it's a picture. Don't try to read it or anything, but this gets to my point that I think my view of disasters has changed based on 2017. You see the three humps there. If you can see the three humps, you've got the idea behind the slides that, initially we go in and we get meals and water in people's hands. We support the Red Cross by getting cots into shelters, and we'll get tarps on roofs and blue roof sheeting, and we'll get spot generation out there to take care of folks. And then we go into an intermediate phase where there's some kind of intermediate task where we're helping people in their homes, getting them some money, maybe getting them a temporary solution to live in, a travel trailer or a manufactured home or something while they try to rebuild that which has been blown apart. And then finally there's the longer term. A lot of this, water, wastewater treatment plants, roads and bridges that have to be taken care of. And so that's kind of how we've operated. And from a logistics perspective, I think we in FEMA have been really good for a number of years at hurricanes that strike the lower 48 states. But what the last couple of years have taught us is that's not catastrophic, what we faced. What we faced last fall was not catastrophic, because those three storms, thank goodness, played out the way they did. Harvey happened, and we had a little bit of time, and then Irma came through the Caribbean, and then we had a little time to react before it hit Florida, and then we had Maria in Puerto Rico, and St. Croix got hit by Irma pretty badly too. And so we had a chance to move our resources to the right in time and space and chase that. That's not the catastrophic. What the nation needs to be ready for is the truly catastrophic. And what we measure ourselves against is something like the Cascadia Subduction Zone. Everybody understand? Everybody heard of the Cascadia Subduction Zone? Big potential earthquake event that could happen in the Northwest. When you look at the tectonic plates, just a terrible, terrible disaster for Washington, Oregon, Northern California, up into British Columbia, stretching into the interior of the country a little bit. Tsunamis going out into the Pacific. Alaska would be affected. That is truly catastrophic, and it's always earthquake season. But I think for the longest time, we've tended to focus on the ebb and flow of hurricane seasons and our ability to deal with that. And when you think of our ability to deal with infrastructure and what might happen, Mr. Rassenberger made the point earlier about being in the Northwest and talking about the generator story up there. And I look at Puerto Rico, and I think their infrastructure was fragile, and we had to go in and deal with it. And I think at one point we had almost 3,000 generators that we deployed over there. But those folks had a system that was fragile, and they were used to dealing with that, and they understood what it was to be without power, to have a generator to provide their own power. I'm not so sure there are parts of the country back here in the lower 48 that understand that too. I think there's a huge reliance that the grid is always going to be there. It's always going to be there for us. If it goes down, it's going to be down for a couple days, like maybe when a storm comes through. But I don't know that we've thought as much as we should or prepared ourselves as much as we should for something like a catastrophic Cascadia event, like the big earthquake in Southern California, or even New Madrid. I mean, you've read about New Madrid. That's when, in the 1800s, when the Mississippi flowed backwards and bells and church towers rang in Boston, from an earthquake that was, along the Mississippi. Earthquakes, I don't think we pay enough attention to that. We are now, and our strategic plan is looking more toward the catastrophic. But you are the hugest part of that. Talk a little more in a minute. I think for a long time, lower 48 hurricanes, we're living in our world of 60 kW to 2 megawatt spot generation, get back in, throw it on a facility for a few days, pull it off, and the grid's back up. We're thinking more and more about how we deal with the Department of Energy and partner with the Edison Electric Institute and other consortium level organizations to talk about the grid. But what opened my eyes in Puerto Rico with the microgrid stuff that we did, and hey, my eyes were opened when I was in Iraq. Before that, I could tell a toaster from a dump truck on any given day, and after Iraq, I could tell you what a TM2500 was, and what an LM6000 was, and what a Frame 9 was, and I could decide what those were, and I saw the true impact of power on a nation and what it can be for us and what we need to be prepared for in the truly catastrophic. So it's important that we have this conversation. Don't read this. Look at the 3 darker blue blocks. You heard about the emphasis in our strategic plan on partnering with the private sector. So there are 3 legs to my logistics plan for FEMA. We do things 3 ways, or we should be doing things 3 ways. We have, I tell you, that lower 48 model, that federal response model where we take all the efforts of the federal government with contract help in tow, and we lay down this replacement federal supply chain. We go out there and deliver water and meals to people, and we push generators out there, and we got to do that better. We got to do that bigger, faster, and smarter. Amen. Second part is increased private sector engagement. And then the third one, I'll talk to the third a little bit, then I want to spend some time on number 2. So build regional, state, local, and territorial capabilities. We got to work really, really, really hard with our states so that they have the capability for lower level events and to jumpstart our response and taking care of their citizens by being able to do things like restore power to a certain level, be able to get food and water to their citizens while we come in the federal effort that's bringing a lot more resources, that's bringing the pros from Dover who know how to do bigger things. Jumping back up to the second one, I'll give you a story. I've been in logistics for all of 6 months. I'm an engineer who's now a logistician. And there was a study of supply chain impacts by storms in the Mid-Atlantic. And so it was a little bit of a theoretical study, and it was a little bit of a real study. And it looked at the Mid-Atlantic as being Norfolk to New York City. And this study involved looking at Sandy, what Sandy did, and then looking at maybe at a Sandy and a half or a double Sandy having that impact. And it kind of compared how we might respond, how we did respond during Sandy. And there were some interesting vignettes. So I'll use food and water. It's not power, but I think it's illustrative of why we got to partner with the private sector, why we have to understand supply chains and capabilities and all that in the private sector, maybe before anything else we do. So, we have models. Sandy's going to hit impacted populations in places like New York and New Jersey, lots of folks. We calculate out what we need, and we clear everything out of our warehouses. I think we had 12.5 million meals and probably 40 million liters of bottled water that we send north into the disaster area. We turn on contracts for more meals, halal meals, kosher meals, MRE meals that the Department of Defense gave us, and pushed all that into the impact. When Sandy was over, this was a loaves and fishes moment, and we took everything back that was extra. We filled up every bit of shelf space that we started out with, and we had to go rent 6 more warehouses to store the leftovers. We didn't have a clue of the supply chains that were out there, how they were operating, and how we interacted with that. It's absolutely incredible that CNS, largest wholesale grocer, I think probably on the East Coast, one of 3 really big wholesalers in the Mid-Atlantic area. CNS on any given day has 25 to 30 times the capacity in a week of everything that we did, federal, state, local government, over 6 weeks. And they can turn the rheostat up, and they're one of only 3 major wholesalers. There are a couple other ones behind it that can do work. And so the whole idea of, man, our first stop needs to be you all, because who's providing power before the storm hits? You are. The pros from Dover, the grid, everybody that has their hand in power out in America right now. Who is going to be doing it after the storm is over and when we're recovering and putting the pieces together? You are. In the end, my mission in life is to partner with you all, because what I want to do is that gap where there's a downturn in capability till we get back up on the other side. I want to narrow the gap, and I want to make it not as deep. And I want to figure out how to do that. I mean, there will always be a role for us to store meals and bottles of water and generators in our warehouses out there to be able to run to meet an unmet need in a particular state for a period of time. But man, you bring so much more. You bring infinite capacity compared to what we can do. And that's we, the federal government. I mean, I've got great partners in the Defense Logistics Agency, in GSA, and a bunch of folks with great purchasing power and capabilities out there. But you are infinite compared to us, and that's why this strategic plan and what we do with the strategic plan, and in particular, the focus and the partnership, I mean, that's what it's all about. That's how we're truly going to be ready for the catastrophic. We won't be ready for the catastrophic. The federal government will never marshal enough resources on its own to go take care of folks that have had that catastrophic event, probably an earthquake, but it could be something in the way of a storm that's going to happen. We won't be ready for that. So to that end, I think we've had some really enlightened leadership come on over the last year. Brock Long and Jeff Byard, my bosses, said, the federal approach to all this is kind of fragmented, to say the least. If any of you that are familiar with the structure we use, we have 15 emergency support functions, and then we divide critical infrastructure and critical national capabilities sectors up into 22 areas, and we approach this kind of helter-skelter. And they said, there are basically 7 lifeline areas where what we ought to do is have a laser focus coming out of the gates and responding to a disaster on these, and we need to stabilize these lifelines in communities. And once we stabilize it and look down there in food and fuel, once we have food and fuel stabilized, or not food and fuel, but fuel and power stabilized, then we know that we can make that transition into a more deliberate, longer-term recovery. But until we do that, we put the population at risk. So it's bringing a whole bunch of different things together, and nested in this is the idea, hey, to do that, we got to be partnered with you. And like I said, that I'm standing up here today, and that we had the conversation last night, we'll have a conversation today, and we will continue to talk. We're on our way to doing right by the American people to be able to do this, to be ready for the truly catastrophic day. I'll talk to you about temporary power. You guys are all about power, so I want to address that. I think some of you know what we do. I mean, we're pretty simple in what we do, and we want to expand, our ability to address power problems. If you look at the right-hand corner, you'll say, 25 times 30, you have 750 generators that you keep, right? That's it. That's right now, 60 kW to about 2 megs, and we don't have a lot of the 2 megawatt generators. We have them stationed at our distribution centers from Guam to Honolulu, to California, Moffett Field, moving up to Tracy, California, up in the valley, Fort Worth, Atlanta, Frederick, Maryland, Cumberland, Maryland, and then in the Caribbean, just southwest of San Juan. It's enough to put a Band-Aid on some of the critical needs that are out there. But like I said, that's 750, and in the end, we deployed 3,000 generators, I think, to Puerto Rico. How do we do that? Well, to do the generator installation mission, we lean heavily on the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers is the executing agent for that. They have in-place contracts that go out and do it. And the Defense Logistics Agency helps us go find and lease generators, and you all may have seen us scrambling around lately to do that. because we have a lot of our capabilities still forward deployed in the Caribbean right now, and hurricane season continues to grind for us here. But we rely heavily on the Corps of Engineers, their expertise, their ability to model and to look at what our fleet ought to look like, and then we lease, purchase, and maintain this fleet that doesn't necessarily take us to that next step where when you look at microgrids and the solution that microgrids might be for a truly catastrophic event, or how they played out in Puerto Rico. I would say that was a catastrophic event. Maria was a catastrophic event for the people of Puerto Rico for a number of reasons. It was a terrible storm, and it hit infrastructure that might not have been robust as it might otherwise have been, and we had to deal with power outages in a way that we, FEMA, had not dealt with for a while. So it was a little bit of a pickup game, and we got to the end state, but I think that's, again, why this relationship is really important. Just a couple more slides. So just give you kind of a flavor for how big we are or how small our capability is. I think I got all these from Randy Johnson in Hawaii. So you see what we got stacked in the warehouse in the lower left-hand corner. I think we have some stuff racked out for Young Brothers. I think that was a shipment that was going to the Big Island a couple months ago to get ready for storms. We're loading stuff on a C-17. And we have, an Army vehicle hauling some stuff away from our distribution center, land, sea, and air. People ask me, what keeps you awake more at night than anything else in having to do the FEMA logistics mission to support disaster survivors? And it is transportation. Boy, was it an eye-opener to have to deal with the Caribbean. I'll tell you, Crowley Maritime was heroic. We did not have a lot of contract capabilities in place. There are a lot of other ones, trailer, bridge, tote, and all that came to the fore, but we had a contract with Crowley, and Crowley did great by us, and I think did great by the folks in the Caribbean in helping us get things to where they needed to be. Hawaii is even further away, the most isolated, populated place on the planet. And then you fly for 7.5 hours from there to get to Guam. So things are out there, and transportation is really hard. Transportation easier in the lower 48, but when you're going to deal with the catastrophic, think back of that earthquake scenario in the Northwest again, and if you understand how the mountain ranges run and how the roads and bridges are arrayed there, that is going to be really hard. The coast is going to be isolated. There are going to be communities isolated. And what happens in earthquakes? It doesn't happen in hurricanes. You have aftershocks. So we're going to be visited by that event more and more and more as we try to fix things, get in and help people, power them up, get them food, get them water, take care of what needs to be done. We're going to be fighting that storm as it repeats itself in terms of aftershocks. And it is really, really hard stuff. I talked to you about our partnership with the Corps of Engineers. They are our agent for going out and executing the temporary power mission. And some of the ways that we worked in Puerto Rico, for example, that we hadn't worked before is what you see here, going off and servicing non-federal generators. If there are critical things that are out there, wherever they might be, technically, but thank goodness there's not a FEMA lawyer in the room. Yeah, so technically, I mean, FEMA could go out, whatever the governor wants, we can go support. And if there's no other way of doing it, we can do it. That includes help with the private sector, as well as other public sector entities, stuff that's not, directly part of the FEMA mission. So you see us servicing a non-federal generator there. Microgrids, a couple microgrids put in place. They're in place now, probably going to be in place for a while over there, while that whole system gets stabilized. And then the grid restoration mission. You can see the poles being loaded on a Crowley barge down at Port Canaveral. That was something I don't think the Corps of Engineers expected, but they jumped into all of this telling us that, go back, think about that Lifeline slide that had the rolling donuts in there. The fact that we're now looking at integrated response, bringing everybody to the table for power and fuel. I mean, how important is that when you're thinking about redoing the grid in Puerto Rico, where transmission, distribution, you got transformers, you got generation issues that are going to go on there. Then you're going to have to maintain all this stuff. You're going to have to buy a whole bunch of things, the bill of materials that goes over to enable this. How do we, the federal government, do that intelligently? We may not have done that as intelligently as we might have. I mean, I have some people whisper in my ear from Edison Electric Institute that said, hey, there might have been a better way to do this. But I think the bottom line is now, after Puerto Rico, we realize there are some big infrastructure missions, power in my mind being preeminent, where we need to think about this more and we need to partner more tightly in this business. And then, so finally, I'm down to my last one. Now we'll have a conversation. So you all know, how do I work with FEMA? How do I, if I have something to offer, what do I understand what the contracting opportunities are? There are some flyers that are out there. Let me go. I've got one in my pocket. I'm going to pull it out and demonstrate this trifold flyer. You'll find some out on the table out there. It's FEMA's Industry Liaison program, which is the flyer you see in the picture here with the phone numbers and all. I think they're going to scan it in and put it out there. I've been in other federal agencies, and a lot of times it seems like there's not a lot of interest in integrating with the private sector. If somebody calls in, yeah, we'll talk to you, but we're afraid of talking to you because of all the acquisition rules and the federal acquisition regulations out there. We are not. I'm not, and I don't think our chief of acquisition is. And the industry liaison program that he established is really, really good in a couple of different ways. If you go into this, I'm going to hear from you. If you have a capability, they grab what you have, the issue that you have, and it gets circulated not only to me, but amongst a lot of other senior leaders there, because you never know. There could be some second or third order things. There might be somebody more than just a logistics guy in FEMA interested in this, and we'll sit down and talk. I think probably the most important thing, keeping me out of an orange jumpsuit, is the fact that when we do this and use the industry liaison folks, we stay clean, because the idea is a federal agency talking point to point to, say, a vendor out there offering something, then you got to be really careful, because if we're anticipating any kind of acquisition, we don't want to poison the barrel because we now suddenly had discussions and you can't compete because we anticipated an acquisition and it wasn't open to everybody. So the industry liaison program lets us get together, lets us understand the industry more out there to be able to get smarter in this business, while we don't run afoul of acquisition regulations, and we don't get in trouble, and you can continue to play in that realm and compete with us should anticipated acquisitions come up. So I can't say enough about the folks up there. They do a great job. They know I'm really interested, and they field all the phone calls. They fill it out. They let me know, and we just make sure we stay clean. So, like Forrest Gump, that's about all I have to say about that. And that takes me to the end of what I would just want to do in terms of framing and to give you some context for how FEMA operates right now. I would love to field your questions if you got any questions, and it could be about anything. You got a question about all that water that's sitting on the runway at Ceiba, the former Roosevelt Roads, I can tell you all about it. It was excess. It was never denied to a disaster survivor, and we accessed it through GSA, and people took it, and it's theirs. Anyway, that's just me venting. All right, anybody got any questions? I'm going to come down here so I can see throughout or beyond the blazing suns that are in my eyes. Sir.
So, thank you. Being a resident of the Pacific Northwest, I'm curious to learn in regard to preparation, what is being done by the federal government, by states or private enterprise to prepare for what, as you mentioned, could be a significant disaster in the Northwest?
So there are a bunch of tools that, I guess I'm discovering all the time what the Department of Homeland Security has and what other agencies. So we're focused in particular on, we're focused everywhere. If you don't live there, we're thinking about you. But in the Northwest, and particularly in California with the big SoCal and with Cascadia, in a number of ways. The Department of Homeland Security has agents who are out on the ground, who are integrated with the state and the private sector out there for planning, for catastrophic planning. And we have a technical assistance programs now with grants money. As part of the strategic plan, I'm trying to corral as much grants money as I can for states to do research, to better plan for, to put contingency contracts in place to be better prepared. So I'll fast forward you why that is really important. You hit the nail on the head. So Southern California, we have a program called TA, Technical Assistance. And I showed up at one of these events in the greater Los Angeles area, and we were sitting around the table and this was sponsored by the department, and we suddenly started talking about, Southern California earthquake, that's a lot of people. I think when you look at the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, I'm sounding like the old Dragnet show, the city of Los Angeles, county of Los Angeles, and the greater area that's going to be affected by this, 19 million people. And I go, okay, 19 million people. Let's see, 2 meals a day, 3 liters of water a day. Man, that's a lot. 2 meals a day, that's 38 million meals for day one. I store maybe 12 million, and I've got contracts for others, and I could dip into DLA MREs or whatever, but in having a conversation with, and this was not the biggest, they were down the list a little bit, one of the wholesale grocers out there, and we started having a discussion to say, they go, we have shelf-stable food. We have cereal, we have canned, raviolinis, whatever. We have tuna. We have a lot of stuff that's not the head of lettuce that's going to wilt the day after tomorrow. in our distribution centers and had them go back, and when they looked at their distribution centers and they calculated, they kind of kitted together. We gave them, hey, here's the caloric content we want a meal to have, an individual meal to have. You can put them together as family boxes, and you want a starch, a main course, a canned fruit or something like that. They came back and said, okay, we probably not too much, that we can help you here with, but we figured we could feed 700,000 people for 30 days. That's 21 million meals. That was one vendor, not the biggest wholesaler that was out there, that had that capability that was close inside the wire. So, hey, what do we do with that? Let's plan for that. Let's get some pre-positioned agreements or contracts or whatever in place. It's not us. We are always in support of the governor. The governor is in charge of planning for and being ready for all these events, and when an event happens, we are responding to the governor. The governor is in charge. But I think that's an example of there are capabilities out there and things we need to plan for. For power in the Northwest, I think we're kind of nascent. We've just had a number of studies and technical assistance visits out there that are starting to look at things in the Northwest and the grid and how robust is the grid and how prepared are we as individual households or whatever, to deal with things. And we're just starting to wrap our arms around it. But I'm heartened by the fact that we now have some grants money that will go in through various tools in the strategic plan to enable the state to start to do studies and put arrangements in place to where we can grab onto that private sector capability, that's in the disaster impacted area. It doesn't need to be the federal government bringing something from the outside. The pros that live this every day, day in and day out, have a lot of capability that's really close to disaster. We just need to think about it, organize it, and get it to the right place at the right time. Okay.
Here I am back here.
Okay.
So just thinking from the type of major catastrophe that you're envisioning, think back to what being ready for that would be. Say it's the earthquake in Washington and Oregon, and just thinking about power. And suppose that event happens and 1/3 of the people in those two states are out of power for whatever reason. And so microgrids or large generators moving in is part of the preconceived solution. Having that prepared and then ready on an annual, all the time for 10 or 20 years into the future, that boils down to having a lot of inventory, trucks, equipment, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, compared to how much money is spent now, how much money do you envision being available to build up and sustain a major response like that for power?
I don't know. It's a great question. Capability costs money. But I think folks are listening right now. I will tell you, based on, latest event, aha moment. Remote places are hard to get to. Puerto Rico is hard to get to. Hawaii is hard to get to. Guam, Saipan, Tinian are hard to get to. I successfully argued with OMB. I laid out a 2-year plan. I need to stock more generators, food and water, tarps, and a few other things in these isolated places because it takes time for the supply chains to be restored. It takes time just to haul something. It's a 5-day, 6-day sail by barge out of Jacksonville to get to Puerto Rico. It could be, depending on the type of ship from the West Coast, 3, 4, 5 days to get something to Hawaii. We need more. And I won the day with OMB, and I was able to get a slug of money that I was able to spend at the end of this fiscal year, and they said, okay, come back after the break, after the fiscal year. Let's talk about your need for preparedness, then next year, what you want to spend next year to increase that overseas preparedness. In the strategic plan, there are some other things to create more preparedness, more stuff that's in the plan, and OMB and others are asking about, okay, come and explain this to us. So I think I think people are hearing us. But you're right, it's an affordability thing. How much is enough? How much can we afford? What do you get ready for? Do you get ready for the worst day? Some of these earthquake events, you'll look, they occurred one every 527 years, and the probability of something happening isn't. You don't run, the clock doesn't run, and because it's on a 523-year cycle and we're at 521, absolutely means with absolute metaphysical certitude that it's going to happen next year. All that comes into play in trying to justify things, and it's really, really hard. So we're working on it, I guess, is the bottom line. But I'm seeing a strategic plan that has us focused on that now, and I see folks that are listening to us. So that's good.
Jeff, thanks for being here today and for describing what FEMA is doing. You have described, particularly in the Northwest scenario, a problem where no matter how much money the federal government had at its disposal, it's not enough. It's essentially infinite resources. And therefore, it behooves all of us to be more prepared. One of the things that I recall, this may be well dated, but having a 3-day supply, a fairly limited supply for each one of us. Is FEMA going to revise its messaging such that you prepare all of us for a much longer duration, such that we all begin to normalize the fact that we need a month's, 2-3 months worth of supplies ourselves, such that we're not depending on mama federal government?
Yeah. No, it's a great point. A huge part of the strategic plan is that preparedness messaging out there. We as a nation, we as individuals, we as families, we as local communities need to be better prepared. Yeah. I mean, my wife and I were talking the other day. I mean, I got 2 Labrador retrievers, and I go, man, we just live hand to mouth. If something happened bad, how much food do I have for the dogs? I mean, just something simple like that. I don't think we're not going to dictate nationally everybody will keep 14 to 17 days of supply. If you go to Hawaii, I think the state of Hawaii's advice to folks on Hawaii is 14 days. You know, have 14 days of supply on hand. Now, economic reality, I mean, we're all from a broad spectrum of individual capabilities and financial circumstances. How much of America has the ability and the wherewithal to do that? Maybe not everybody. We need to think about it. I mean, I was impressed. I went out to Salt Lake City and I saw the big giant Bishop's warehouse, the big LDS warehouse. Wow, that's impressive. That is a great warehousing operation out there. And I understand. Yeah, I understand about having a year's worth of food or something, substantial to be take care of yourself. And I think, that's a good stretch goal. I don't think we will ever specifically say at the national level we have to do that, because again, disaster response belongs to the governors. We want to reinforce it with messaging. We want to figure out ways to enable that to happen. And all of it's here. You can ask, are there ways to do that? Do you have ideas? Maybe I got a couple, but man, I want to hear from you guys. I want this to be the first step in a conversation. We'll be at the next one, San Antonio or wherever it is. And we want to have discussions from you to say, hey, have you ever thought about this? Or here's a way how to deal with that. Or, where do you think your sweet spot is above what you stock in terms of generators right now? What did you learn from Puerto Rico and how can we help? I want to have that conversation at this level because I think you all have ideas and have turned rocks over and thought about things that we haven't. So, yeah, you are going to be the answer, probably much more than we'll be the answer thinking about it all day long, because you're the pros at this business. What else?
Hey, Jeff, Chris Nagel of Siemens. So I have a couple questions. You had mentioned microgrid a few times in your presentation. The first part is, can you give us a little detail of what a microgrid looks like in a response? So is that, for example, some diesel generators islanded, or are you bringing in other assets? And the second part is, what role does FEMA play in the microgrid world? Like that, in your framework, you had a prevention element to it, and obviously microgrids are a good part of prevention. So what role does FEMA play in future planning with the local, state, federal agencies when it comes to microgrids?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So I'll take the last part. So microgrids, I went up. I think states are getting it by pushing the idea that, hey, private sector is the answer. Prevention, mitigation, we need to do that. I was up in, South County, south of Boston, I think. And I went up to South County, had a meeting, and we were talking about what happens after the storm. And when you suddenly looked at it, so when you start to look at where things are, shopping centers, where people go to get things, and you looked at a shopping center, and I just with the power company was there, and you looked at a Lowe's. Didn't have a Home Depot, but you had a huge grocery store. You had everything that you needed, Walgreens, you name it, that supported that area of the county. And they were already thinking about, let's make sure that everybody there has a generator. And maybe we integrate the fueling and the maintaining of those generators so that whole shopping center is all lit up together. Let's go back upstream and follow the circuits and see where they lead. Is there a particular substation or whatever that services all that? What are the risks to that? What breaks typically? And is that something that we could either harden or have on hand, contingency stocks of things to fix? So I think part of what we do through all these technical assistance programs is get out to communities to say, hey, what can you do to better prepare yourself? What do microgrids look like? Man, I don't know. Now you're plumbing the depths of my knowledge here. We were talking about who put in the microgrid, and where was it? Bangladesh or whatever, APR, the 300 or 200 megawatts of power, lots of 2 meg units or whatever. I mean, yeah, I don't know. What does it look like? I don't know. Will FEMA ever buy a whole bunch of gas turbine things and put them on rail cars and be able to haul them around the country to establish, something at a high end like that? No, probably not. I don't know that we know what the microgrid solution is going to be. We were faced with one example of how it might play out. Everything else is theoretical. Theoretical is good, but we would look to you guys to have a conversation with, because I know not all states, we know, not all states are created equal. Not all states or areas of the country face the same threat. Not everybody has an earthquake threat. Some people have hurricane threats, and they all affect the infrastructure differently. And so the solution might be different for those areas. And so for me, I don't think we have built as actionable, well thought out, catastrophic disaster plans as we should have. I mean, I think sometimes we pay contractors by the inch or the pound to help us crank out plans. You'll find something dealing with Wyoming and you'll see New Jersey mentioned in it, and somebody did cut and paste and didn't do all the fine New Jerseys and add Wyomings and all that business. But I think we will get better out of the catastrophic plan and looking and making more actionable things. And I think this focus on sectors and sector stabilization is going to get us looking at integrated solutions and not just little isolated one-off solutions. I mean, I don't have an answer as to what my vision for microgrids is. I'm not that smart. Charles is that smart. Others, you guys in this room are smarter than he and I combined 10 times over. So that's why I want to have the conversation, and I want to be able to give you the context and the problem set that I see, and bring to you planning conundrums or dilemmas that we're faced with, and get your ideas about how we might address these. That's why this is just as hugely powerful. We're here talking together. I know that's not much of an answer. I tapped dance around, but I don't have an answer yet. But I'm looking for one.
Yes, sir. Power is only as good as the fuel source that provides fuel for for those power systems. In wet environments, particularly since the introduction of bio into diesel, we've seen a lot of pretty rapid degradation of that fuel. What is FEMA doing to maintain the proper specifications for fuel, and what happens when those specifications aren't met? How is FEMA addressing fuel quality with regard to backup power in disaster situations?
Okay, so now you're outside my realm of possibility. Charles, I don't know if you want to address it, because I will tell you, if you got to go one level up to Department of Homeland Security for sectors out there in terms of what the sectors are doing, because they are all about infrastructure risk and infrastructure preparedness. Can't tell you. So, you know what tells me? The next time I come back to this, I need to bring somebody from DHS, from the National Infrastructure Coordination Center, particularly from the sector or two that are really power heavy related. They need to be part of this conversation right now. Because I'll tell you what, I'm doing, my biggest worry is winter summer mix and vapor pressure and all that, and are we going to get the waivers in place to get enough fuel into North Carolina and South Carolina this last time? And we were probably a couple days slow on getting the waivers, RVP waivers in to be able to get fuel moving the right way, and we were slow on that. Note to self, tick this off earlier. That is great. I'll take that back, and I think that informs a better conversation we can have with you guys in the future.
Is there a separate contact? Would you say National Infrastructure?
National Infrastructure Coordination Center. So you have FEMA. FEMA is part of the Department of Homeland Security. So FEMA, we're operators. We're at the point of the spear. We're the guys that rush out 911 and do things. And then there's a separate organization up at the Department of Homeland Security that is focused on preparedness and looks at sectors of the economy, and is it's infrastructure resilience focused. And I will tell you, a year ago, we were not well connected with them. We are, it's night and day, this conversation we're now having with them. Because a year ago, I called him up. I don't even know what the issue was. I said, hey, I got a call. He goes, hey, you're playing around in our area. You're talking to folks we normally talk to in these sectors. I go, yeah. What's the issue? And so told him, I need this problem solved. And they said, okay, great. Just by close of business tonight, give us the data. We'll grind on it tomorrow, and then on Wednesday we'll get you the answer back. And I told him, you don't understand. It's now 8:30. I need an answer in the next 2 hours, because I'm going to redirect transportation assets, reprioritize things going in, and I need to know the impact in this particular infrastructure sector as to what's going on. boy, to their defense, they turned it around, and they are much more operationalized, and they were sitting with us for this last group of events when we're looking at dams, we're looking at roads, we're looking at a lot of things. So we are operationalizing them, and they're getting us to think more broadly and deeper about infrastructure protection. That's why, revelation to me, whenever I come to something like this, I ought to be dragging them along with me, because they use national laboratories. They're connected into the private sector in so many ways with public infrastructure and its vulnerabilities, and know a whole lot that I don't know about until I start thinking about it during disaster. We're wedded together now, but when we come and talk to you, it ought to be both of us together. That's a great point.
You're talking to a group here that's a great conduit into the emergency generator business. And so you're dealing with a lot of manufacturers and technology. So when you're dealing with the unexpected weather results of a disaster, then you got the man-made. So I'm curious about EMF, the electromagnetic pulse that could be generated from the sun, but also man-made. How prepared is the generator backup systems across the country with all the computer logistics that are in them today to be affected by an event such as that? What kind of comment suggestions would you have for our industry to where the country isn't rendered wasted from generators that can't function anymore due to an event such as that?
Yeah. Good question. Man. So you're right. Yet another thing that keeps me awake at night when I'm not being kept awake by the transportation and other things. You're absolutely right. I mean, we get a reminder once a month. We get a solar weather update, unless there's something happening in between. And you're absolutely right. If something bad happens on the sun, that half of the Earth that happens to be facing that direction, when it hits the atmosphere, is going to have issues. And I understand how long it takes to get transformers and switchgear and you name it, everything and all the components that are potentially fried by all this. How long it takes to recover from something like that. Do I have an answer? Are we thinking about it? Yeah. I think finally we're integrated into our planning. And again, that's why I'm heartened by the fact that we're talking to the Department of Homeland Security and their infrastructure protection folks more, because they're the ones charged with making sure the nation's infrastructure is prepared and ready to go. We're the executors who pick up the pieces when protection fails. My boss wanted to rename our directorate, not the Office of Response and Recovery. It's when mitigation and protection fails, then we take over, because that's what we pick up the pieces from. I can't answer your question now, but I think the next time I need to be prepared to, and it is something that we are worried about because we do watch the sun and we understand what the impacts are going to be. I'm probably not the guy to answer that, but next time I will bring back the folks to do that and make sure I get the issue. At least I understand more about what they're doing.
Sorry, everybody. I know we could continue for 45 minutes, but to be respectful to our next speaker, we're gonna have to move it on. So just to let everybody know, Jeff, will you be around?
I'm around.
And you're gonna
Government
be at the
relations, yeah,
Government
show up
Relations
there.
Committee meeting.
Absolutely.
You're in the hallways, at lunch. Continue the conversation with Jeff out in the hallway. But
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jeff.